Hi, this is Ken Boa with Reflectance Ministries, and I'm with my associate, Stuart McAllister.
Hi, Ken. Good to be here again.
I'd like you to tell us more about an article that you shared with me, and I just read the other day, toward a technological renewal that was found in the journal Mere Orthodoxy.
Yeah, I was reading this article about Michael Sarkassis, and I think given what we talked about recently on the psychology of totalitarianism, I've been very intrigued for a long time between how the context and conditions that we live in shapes us. Jamie Smith talks about the idea of cultural liturgies, going to the shopping mall and all this, how it forms and shapes our behavior. Well, there's nothing more formative than the very fact that we live in such a technologically dominated world. So this article I found interesting, and because of all that you've written on discipleship and what your formation and the kind of things apologetically you've written, I thought this would be a really interesting discussion. I knew you would find it interesting. So I'm intrigued by the theological vision behind this and the critique, and I thought you would find that helpful too.
Yes, it was for me, a very helpful understanding of the techne of the arts of human fabrication, but which, if understood that way, technology is not something new. It is something that goes, as he'll discuss, right back to Genesis chapter 4, and so you have the whole beginning of technique and what that looks like, and how he then develops what I thought was a very creative understanding of this whole arc that goes from the beginning and is really now more fully expressed, especially with our new Tower of Babel.
And the human story, looking at all of life as a narrative, and particularly from a Christian perspective, looking from Genesis onwards, and you get right on those early days, right from the primal movement of God amongst people in the centrality of worship. And yet you have that rebellion. You have the whole idea of those that rebel in Genesis 4, and the picture of Nimrod and those that build the music instruments and technology. So, and it's not that's the human ability to create things is wrong, but the human ability to create things in defiance of God and as a means of expressing their independence, that is a very fundamental issue, I think.
That was a major development in his thinking to me, that he expressed that it was against the grace of God and an attempt to control life and the world in our terms that seemed to be animating these kinds of Babel-like attempts. I will not be fruitful and multiply. I'm not going to spread. I'm not going to be this. I'm going to instead of going to spread throughout the world, we're going to just focus here, and we're going to, in defiance of God's mandate, do things that would be, if we work together, nothing will be impossible to us.
For me, I know in my own studies of this over the years, one of the key junction points, in fact, that we've used this in a couple of the teachings through reflections, is the Genesis 11 story, because in that, as the people spread, eventually they come to this plain and they seek to build a tower, and they want to make a name for themselves. So this fundamental drive seems to be security. But and God comes down and, of course, scatters them, and we have the beginning of the Babylonian pattern in a sense. But Genesis 12, you have the exact contrast, isn't it? Because Abraham is called by God, and we read in Hebrews, to go out to a place that he knows not where. So he hears a voice, he receives a revelation, and he moves. And those two animating drives, almost like Augustinians, well, it is the city of God and the city of man, the human desire for mastery and control independently from God, and the desire to live under God in surrender to a word, which means faith, being. So it's almost like faith is operational, the operational dynamic, and fear is the operational dynamic of the other one. Does that make sense?
Yeah, there's faith versus fear. It's this mindset of, am I going to trust in God, or am I going to work on my own efforts to try to create a universe that will correspond to my own desires? And so, again, there's two different approaches that one takes, either to try to create a world that we can manage and understand. Let's build a city and a tower, or not. And so they sought the tower builders, neither to embrace the path of grace or to simply submit to the post-lapsarian human condition, that post-fall condition. Instead of, they wanted to have security, significance, a sense of purpose. And to achieve this, by building mastery over the precarious and unpredictable conditions of our existence. They wanted security and stability, want to build a city, want to build a tower, we want to create something.
That desire, which I think is so primal, Ken, in all of us. And I think of many people, I mean, you and I were in conversations recently, we've heard people talking who are believers, but don't trust the word of God, don't trust the promises. It's like they're still afraid of death. They're still afraid. They want mastery. They want security. They want enough money in the bank to make sure there'll never be a rainy day. They want enough social security to make sure that everything's covered. They want enough health insurance that, absolute. But at some point, the reality is they will get sick. They will die. Everyone will. As you said, death is 100% success rate.
The statistics are impressive. I think it was George Bernard Shaw. 1 out of 1 dies. But I was very pleased to see his insight on Jacob's ladder as well when he was describing this whole condition prior to Babel, and then after that, this imagery of Jacob's ladder it kind of be a referral back to the tower, the ziggurat. And that was something I had seen as well. That was the word that can be used as more of a platform, that kind of like not a stairway, but a stair steps that move up as in the tower as a ziggurat.
Yeah, instead of a modern ladder that we think of, like steps climbing up.
It's actually more of the steps going up a plane and up a ziggurat. And of course, at the top is where we would then be able to mediate and control. So we will build a tower to our own achievements and accomplishments in defiance of God's mandate. And so there's nothing going to be impossible for us to do if we do it this way. I thought that was a very fascinating thing.
But his point being that the ladder came down from God.
Yes, the angels of God going up and down along that ladder, along that plank.
So it's a door open from him to us.
Yes,
he is building a way up.
Again, it says it's this top-down idea rather than a bottom-up. A bottom-up reductionism rather than a top-down understanding. So a biblical vision always gives us the big picture, the top-down, the wellspring of beauty, goodness, and truth. And that accounts for then the details that we see in the bottom, but we want to turn it around and we want to become gods ourselves.
So let me tease this out with you, Ken, because you've done a lot. I mean, you studied at the Case Institute of Technology, and we affirm the role of technology, but it's the Christian yes, but there are qualifications, and the qualifications would be this tendency to independence and autonomy.
Yes, that's correct.
And if my technology, whether it's my cell phone or my toys, whatever they are, produce a level of dependence on something other than God, already we're seeing that the tendency is self-reliance. I don't need faith. I don't need God. I can take care of this myself. So God is the God of the gaps. He fills in the spots where I don't need him. I can take care of myself.
That's correct.
And that's seems to be the deception of all technology, because we rely and trust. I mean, to me, the prototypical picture of that is the Titanic, isn't it?
It's a perfect...
the unsinkable ship.
It's an icon of hubris and the ultimate consequence that led to it. Yes. It's an unsinkable ship.
I mean, the movie was, of course, it was something in itself, but I mean, the story, just the narrative of that ship, of how well designed and all that it could do and all that it should do, and even the training of the crew, and yet an iceberg comes alongside, and then the ship ends up on its maiden voyage at the bottom of the sea. I mean, it's astonishing.
That to me is a portrait of what you'd like to see, more overtly clear divine judgment on one hand of human hubris, but it's a product though of our supposition that we can achieve and accomplish the beginnings of the city of God versus the city of man.
It just is a supposal, Ken. But all right, here we are. We come into the age of globalization. We've been in the age of, from 2008, the acceleration of the iPhone, interconnected world, all kinds of the metaverse and so forth coming forth. And we're being given all these technological wonders and promises. And then the little COVID virus, the coronavirus, hits us. And the whole world literally is crippled or paralyzed. And we're still recovering from this tiny little disease.
And it's not the disease so much as it was the narrative, the fear-based, fear-mongering associated with it, which was not based on good science, but mediaized, and then as a consequence became the group think that that could not brace or tolerate any divergence of opinion. So once again, the supposition that these people know best. And so even though they're proven wrong, they still know best.
But look at all the various reactions, from Sweden to China, or the Chinese version, we can control this. And then at the end, they ended up opening up their own rules. And of course, some people got sick and died. 2 minutes, tragic. But again, all of those measures, all of that was put because we want to rationally order and control.
Ironically, though, more people died of those kinds of attempts to defeat this fear, than they did of the thing itself in many ways, because we lost lives, livelihoods, jobs, hundreds of millions of people. And then the idea of being, it's never happened in human history of quarantining the healthy. So you have a strange array of things these fear-generated narratives ruined hundreds of millions of lives as a consequence, because it's not based upon truth but upon fear. But still, they continue to lead and listen to these voices.
So as you read that article, and with your long history of theological thought and also technological experience, what were your thoughts of what would you see as some of the dangers or warnings to us as Christians from the technological mindset, or the maybe a hidden, almost like a Trojan horse within technology itself that changes us or something?
Yeah, I mean, his summary, it'd be helpful, again, going back to the Augustinian idea of the city of God and the city of man, and how do we then, as followers of God, of God's mandates and works, and pursuing a city that's to come, but how do we live in this present darkness with in a flourishing way, in a fruitful way, in a way that's not driven by fear, but by faith, by hope, and by love? And that's so radically different. And this is what people need to hear: is faith, hope, and love, not fear and terror and diminishment. That's consequently achieved because when people are afraid, they will give up their freedoms to gain the illusion of security. So then it leads just to another kind of a process where it becomes self-perpetuating. So to me, two different cities. As he writes it in this article, as Saint Augustine memorably put it, we have here the beginnings of the city of God and the city of man. He's talking about Babel here, the two distinct and competing ways of living after Eden in the post-lapsarian human condition. Consequently, I'm compelled to read Cain's story, if not exactly allegorically, then at least paradigmatically. Confronted with the dire prospects for life east of Eden, Cain has implicitly refused the way of grace. He's unwilling or unable to turn to God in faith and in repentance. Instead, it is clear that he will rely on his own strength and ingenuity in order to survive. Driven by fear and the prospect of insecurity, alienation, insignificance, and mortality, Cain will, and I don't think it is an overstatement to put it this way, he will seek to overcome the fragility of the human condition through a project of technological mastery. That becomes iconic for our age. I thought that was a perceptive way of do we choose the way of grace, of dependence, of or do we choose the way of autonomy, of the arrogance?
It's funny, the Christian version, our understanding, that God, the great transcendent, all-powerful, almighty, all-holy God, becomes flesh. So the transcendent becomes and dwells amongst us, tabernacles, is with us. He embodies relationship and eating meals and fishing and feeding people and caring for them and healing them. And yet in our modern version, we seek to transcend. It's like the flesh becomes image or idea or technique. We go from the concrete to the abstract, seeking answers there, whereas the eternal became flesh and concretized.
Very, very good word. There's a very good distinction.
It's almost like, we talk about Gnosticism in the olden days, that idea of trying to escape the bodily. And it's almost like there's a fundamental war against enfleshment, embodiment.
I think that's right.
And the value, because I think it's like the person taking the picture. I mean, I love the way you see a flower or a thing. You can't walk past it. You have to look at it. You have to touch it, feel it, smell it, look at it, and you want others to see it. Whereas, and a contrast with the tourists with selfie,
Yes.
and they've moved on, and they never saw the flower. It just became a backdrop and a picture,
them.
and they've moved on. But they never felt the texture or the smell or that encounter.
That's where Christianity, the theistic vision of life, provides for us a far more robust grasp of the beauty of the world itself, and to appreciate what it means to be an embodied being. And so it's the most incarnational. It's the most so it invites us to use our sensorium, a God-given array of capacities, so we can relate to this world mysteriously. When you look at how fearfully and wonderfully are made, just to look at each of those five senses, and there are actually more than those five senses, but how He's made us so that we're able to actually see, to hear, to smell, to taste, to touch, and all these other components. And it's telling us it is a good, though fallen, it's still a good world. The creation is good. And I'm going to demonstrate that because I'm going to enter in my creation itself. And so I become the God-man, the amphibious God-man. This mystery of us being both spiritual beings in the heaven, seated with Him in the heavenly place, and at the same time, we're embodied beings and agents in this world, in this soul-forming world. It's an amazing concept.
What is this power? What is this force? What is this thing that technology or technological mindset does to us, where it lures us towards the abstract, towards the imaginative, sometimes in the good, but often in the more fantastical. So in other words, like the whole preoccupation with the Marvel characters and the Marvel image, they've made billions of dollars on these films. And yet, I mean, it's fantastical. There's nothing positive or possible in it apart from entertainment.
It's kind of a transhumanism again. It's part of a kind of an idea of actually finding our true identity in a digital space and actually becoming a neo-Gnostics in a very real sense, in which we no longer treasure the analog world, but actually use digital technology as our place where we want to live and inhabit the metaverse. That whole concept of people being defined by their avatars and by those games and those the devices, and as a result, they lose a love for the visible, the tangible, the material.
I know your love of words that rhyme in a way, but remember, we talked, just as I was thinking this, I'd mentioned, I think, again, most of your thoughts come from interaction with other people, so they're not necessarily original. Yeah. But for me, the modern world is marked by this, the idols of magic and mammon. But the third I'd put in there is mastery.
Yes.
So you have magic, mastery, and mammon, and all of those driving us. The magical because of technology and its wonders, the mastery because I need to have a management system, an organizational power and control, and the mammon because of the funds that it gives to me, or the green is good, green is everything, green is God in many people's minds. And I can even imagine some people saying, yeah, man, and so what's wrong with any of that?
That is exactly right. So in fact, I took some notes from you before, and I wrote down mammon and magic. And so now you're asking me to add another one, mammon, magic. And
mastery.
Mastery. And I'm adding it right now because I think that's a very good word. We don't want to have a lack of control, the autonomous self. I want to be the author of my own destiny. And as a result, we feel that if I can amp up technologies and create my own spaces that don't have the trouble of an analog world, where I can then envision what I want it to be and make it that way. It's almost, again, like this arrogant notion that I'm going to create and upload myself, my consciousness, my understanding, so that that hideous strength that Lewis is talking about there with the disembodied head is actually a very real picture of what we're talking about now.
Well, and I was listening to the radio, and there was broadcasting from, of all places, California, and it was highlighting a particular march for yet more freedom. And I was listening to the voices and the people they were interviewing, and the whole vision of freedom was, I mean, I understand people's desire to be left in peace, to get on with their life and so forth. But this was the freedom to completely self-define, the freedom to be totally accepted, the freedom to be absolutely unlimited in anything I do. And that's not freedom, that's anarchy. How, in any social context, is that possible? I mean, if any family you try to do that with your kids, it would be a nightmare. It doesn't happen. So what is this driving power towards this unlimited freedom and using technology as a means to amplify and aggravate and demand and insist to create what in the end? What's this paradise, this progress, this ultimate utopia that we're going to arrive in?
Yes, the illusion of community without the reality thereof. There's no real connectedness. It's just a mediated existence, a buffered existence that people have that becomes less and less capacious, less and less able to grasp the beauty in which they're immersed and surrounded. They're not able to see what's right in front of their nose because they're looking for something they want to create themselves.
And we can't interrelate with others. I mean, the relationality, we're isolated either into solipsism or individualism or into communities that are absolutely buffered to the sense that everybody else outside is an enemy or a threat.
So again, that collective, almost like a collective autism, apathy, anger, and amnesia that you see that's here. I'm looking at some notes I took from you, Stuart, before, and this relates to some of these things as well because they beautifully express some of these insights. I love the way you talked about domestication and suffocation of transcendence, invasive immanence. That's a brilliant concept. That immanence is so invasive, intrusive, that it defines our desires. That's why, as you know, I'm really big on trying to get people to ask what they want more than anything else. So that question, what do you seek, that Jesus asked, is so if they're not asking that, they're going to be settling for something far less than that God wants for them to have.
And I think that the idea that really caught me with that is because, you know, in terms of our values and our desires, we forget the billions of dollars that are spent in advertising research, the psychology. People are trolling over your purchases, mine. They're looking at where we went for a restaurant, what we ordered, why we ordered it, or at least an algorithm is doing it if it's not a person. And then they're coming back with packages. Oh, Ken would want this magazine. Stuart would want to go to this place. He would want to fly this class. He'd want to rent this kind of car. And part of that's, you say, oh, well, that's just, and here again, we're back into market neutrality. It's not neutral.
It's invasive.
And it's bringing, Zuzana Zhubov's great article about the surveillance capitalism. I mean, we are being manipulated, and not often by some known entity, but nevertheless by a power that is not God.
Yeah, and it's not benign.
No, and it's not benign.
It doesn't have our best interests at heart. The amazing thing, as you know, I love to define the agape of God, and that to which we are now called in our relationship with others was the steady intention of your will to another's highest good. I think the ethos we're describing is just the opposite. It's not the steady intention of one's for highest good. It's to take from them, to gain wealth from their preferences, from their consumeristic movements, and to not to serve, but to actually not to actually have a relationship at all. It's atomistic. It's not real. It's not connected.
And Ken, for decades, you have been banging the drum and teaching and writing and speaking about a rule of life. And it seems to me that if ever there's a need for a disciplined, intentional, focused lifestyle, a commitment, this is it. This is a requirement. It's not an optional extra.
We're called to be subversive countercultures agents. I had a conversation with my friend who's the illustrator, Stephen Krotz, and he was talking about artistic community values. And we were just, what does the artistic community treasure? And there were three words that I thought were so countercultural and so analog in so many beautiful ways. The three are, first of all, generosity. The second is wonder. And the third is craft.
Generosity.
Wonder and craft. I love that because craft, that's not something that you just learn by default. You have to practice and gain skill and and to develop excellence in your art and in your craftsmanship. And craftsmanship requires a submission and a service, a kind of an apprenticeship. And wonder is another thing that I think we must train and actually make that part of our rule of life, a rule of wonder almost.
You know, we were picking up on that remember we talked not just about, so it's the same idea. I think that generosity, wonder, and craft, but connects lovely with that concept of reverence, about the whole idea, because we believe we're in a created order, because we acknowledge the one who created it, God. We worship Christ who gave it to us, who died for it, and we worship the Spirit who has been given to us by Him. That reverence for created order and beauty and the redemption of creation and the redemption of life is an epistemological. It's a way of knowing. It's a way of participating. It's a way of entering in fully to life as God intended, without being subverted by technological distractions.
That is right. And this idea of reverence, I'm glad you brought that up, because I was so touched by that article that we discussed before. And it was this wonderful article based upon the work of von Hildebrand. And so this amazing writer that I was not familiar with, that talked about taking into account the sublimity of the world of values. And that upward look unlocks our ability to perceive value. Isn't that a beautiful way of saying it? Reverence, a sense of awe and wonder. Then you can have a capacity to treasure value, without which you don't even know what the things are worth. So again, the ultimate good, the wisest thing we can do is to treat things according to their true value. And that was a beautiful statement by Jonathan Edwards, and he's right. Then to be foolish would be to treat things in a way that's incompatible with their true value. Which brings me to Luke 16. And it's maybe as chilling a text as I can think of in terms of what people are doing. You are those who justify yourselves in the sight of men, but God knows your hearts. Right, that alone is just know that. And then, for that which is highly esteemed among men is detestable in the sight of God. Now, that's a chilling word. A man can give his whole and his only life away for tinsels and toys and trinkets that God says are worthless.
You know, a number of years ago, related to this, is that, again, success, the idol of success, which we want success, and yet we have glorified that to such a degree that using our technological means and our powers. So, you know, you think of those words that Stephen was talking about, generosity and wonder and craft, but what about greed and craft? Tied not to wonder, but to exploitation.
Exploitation, because you can use that for that other purpose.
And so even though we've been given those God-given talents, distorted and demeaned or divorced from their primal source, they become instruments of exploitation or rapacious consumption.
Depends on what energizes and empowers those things. The craft can be itself a wonderful thing, but it can be used for good or for ill. What's the intentionality? What's the drive? What that can be used for this, no matter what that craftsmanship turns out to be.
You can create a laser that can heal an eye, or you can create a laser that's a weapon that can destroy something consequently instantaneously. Yeah.
So it's nothing's neutral. But this article in Reverence also, it's a capacity, because it makes space for value, it's a capacity for capaciousness, which I thought was a wonderful concept. This whole idea of how do you train your sensorium? How do you train your sense of receiving this beauty, this space that God gives us? And as von Hildebrand put it, the one who is reverent does not fill the world with his own ego, believes to being the space that it needs in order to unfold itself, so that you're allowing space for reality to be itself. Of course, we're talking here about God himself. Let him define us and be the one who gives us our true values, to know that the knowledge of him, but it's a response to God's goodness and grace.
That would bring us back to, again, the habits of the heart.
Yes.
So I think of John, again, we're back John 15, if you abide in me and my words abide in you. So that idea of really being Christ-centered by intention, word-centered by intention, prayerful by intention, and surrendered, so that we place ourselves daily, regularly before him.
Before him, yes. It's neither a technique nor performance. It's before all things a disposition. It's Samuel who says to the Lord in the dead of night, "Speak, your servant hears." I mean, that's a receptivity to his grace. It's being open to his grace and his actions, and perceive. You're not performing, you're perceiving, and you're receiving.
So maybe a good way to conclude this, Ken, would just say, I think I remember as a child being taught before to go to school, particularly in British schools, because we walked, didn't have buses, but it was drummed into us, crossing roads all the time. Stop, look
and
listen.
That's not a bad practice for us. A kind of part of your rule, stop, which means make a place for him, make a place for silence and solitude. We can do that in the midst of our day by choosing in those intentionalities. Make mini Sabbaths, stop, and then look, wonder. In other words, that grace of wonder. Do you not grasp that you are surrounded by mystery? And then listen to the voice of God. And listen to his quiet prompts by the Spirit of God. I think we need to use that. I'm going to make that something of that. Stop, look, and listen.
I think that's a great
powerful
word. It's a good reflection to end the day.
God bless.
God bless you.